Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Fragrantica Talks. I'm joined again by Adam and John, who are fastly becoming firm perfume friends. And today we thought we'd talk about a kind of clickbaity topic. We thought we'd talk about winter fragrances and our top threes for winter. So let's kick off. Who wants to start us off with one of their favourite scents for winter?
This is a
John is wearing a sweater. I mean, I think he's primed for it at this point.
Oh goodness. Well, this is one of those easy and difficult topics, right? Because easy because I think fragrance wearing in winter is just there's so many to reach for that are all fantastic. So I sort of went to where I store them thinking like, again, I'll just grab a couple things. But it was, that paradox of, wow, there's too many choices and which do I narrow it down to? So I tried to mix it up a bit with some old favorites and a few things that are new. And I have a bunch here, and I think I'm going to randomly do a little bit of selection. But I think the first is really an old favorite that, gosh, it's important. I think for me, it's very important. And I have an old style bottle. It's been modernized, but this is a Nicotal's Amber Fetish, or Ambre Fetiche, I suppose, if you're saying it in French. But this is, I remember for a while when I first began smelling this whole line, which is a great favorite of mine, I was actually put off a little by this fragrance because it has so much immortelle in it that it does smell like maple syrup to some noses. It's so immortelle and so heavy in the immortelle. But what I really particularly love, though, is that it's also one of the smokiest ambers without smelling ashy. It's sort of, and I've never really found good words for that, but it's not like the smoke that comes from a chimney fire. It's more like maybe the smoke from an oven where nothing's burning, but it's just something that's kind of slowly cooking or something. But it's one of the most comforting ambers, and it's just really powerful. It's powerful perfume. So it's got that. I like perfumes in winter that will, under a coat and under some sweaters and everything, will still, it still manages to escape, which is an interesting facet of fragrance, right? I do think winter perfumes have to, well, they don't necessarily have to. I like it when they have a lot of power because it enables you to enjoy them when you are covered up or when you take your layers off, and whatnot. But really spectacular amber fragrance. Really love this one.
Ambers are such a solid category to go to for that very reason, right? They have to, you know, speaking about it from a more scientific point of view, as you know, John, the materials that make and create amber profiles, the resins specifically, they're such heavy molecules that can really weigh down a composition. And I feel like in order to create an amber that really has that kind of throw that you describe that you love,
Mm.
you have to really mix those heavier natural resinous molecules with something that has a lot of power behind it.
Yeah, yeah,
And
you
it's
do.
really cool when it's done right.
It is, yeah, and I think that's where what's so intriguing about this, and actually why this has been, kind of in the when they first put out this series, why it's been in the line consistently since then. I think it was in the first part of the first decade of the century. Um, it's had a lot of adherents who've been really stuck on it, and they don't want to give it up. Really, really great fragrance. I really love this a lot. Yeah.
So I'm interested in asking you both, do you like winter? And you've sort of touched on this already, John,
Hmm.
but why do you wear, or how do you choose your fragrances in winter? Like, are you wearing them as like a kind of extra layer of comfort? Are you wearing them to warm up? Are you wearing them to project through, several layers and sweaters? Um, Yeah, and I think, do you like the season? Is it a season that appeals to you? And how does that affect your kind of your fragrance choice as well?
Yeah, I mean, I guess quickly I can say I really, really do love winter a lot, and I'm probably unusual in that way. I know some people hate the season, but it's I find there's a great comfort in, like, getting yourself warm, and having a blanket of snow outside. Like, I love that stuff. It's a very New Englandy kind of, it's part of my upbringing and whatnot, and I've always loved that. And I guess it is, I have I said I'm going to be short and sweet here, but I have a really nice memory, a recent memory of commuting into work and having a heavy coat on and a sweater and a scarf and a hat. And I think I'd put on something really strong, like Christian Dior's Oud Ispahan from the Privé line, and just a really strong rose oud perfume. And I really liked the fact that I could imagine that from an outside perspective. I'm not sure a lot of people smelled what I was smelling, but just under my scarf, I could see really, like, quite a lot of fragrance coming out. And I thought, this is nice. This is what I like this right now. And I'm sure if I sort of just opened my coat up a little bit, like, bam, I could probably fill up the train station. But I liked that experience, and it was a nice memory, actually. So I do like
I,
the season.
I love the idea of like bam, and the fragrance just leaps out at everybody.
Yes, exactly.
And I guess one thing we should probably touch on as well is just paint a picture of winter in your neck of the woods for us, because obviously we've got listeners all around the world and they might not necessarily know where we're from or what winter's like where we're from.
Yeah, I mean, Adam and I live relatively close geographically. We have just slightly different climate, but not very much though. And we can get very decent amounts of snowfall. Gosh, it was about 10 years ago, we had that record-breaking year where it snowed every day for an entire winter. And it's very dry, extremely dry here in winter, which does, I think, impact like fragrance and your skin and stuff like that. That's something that comes into play. Like, I actually start to get very dry skin in the wintertime. It does, everything kind of dies down except for some evergreens here, and things start to come up maybe about early to mid March. So it can be, and it's cold, it's cold. So I think that's about an accurate description. Would you say, Adam?
Yeah, absolutely. You live a little bit closer to the sea, so that can be a blessing and a curse.
Right.
Sometimes, they say that when you live close to the sea, especially at a part of the Atlantic where the Gulf Stream is still affecting it, you're supposedly supposed to get, on average, slightly warmer temperatures than the rest of other parts of New England.
Right.
But I don't know. I grew up in a very seaside area myself, a different one than the one you live in, but still. And I always thought it was plenty cold enough. So, it depends on your perspective. To
Yeah.
to answer your question originally about do we like winter, and these two people, bless their hearts, they've heard me complain about winter already quite enough. But so no, I to John's point, like I love the romanticism of it, and a nice snowfall is really cozy and very typical New England. At the same time, I've really grown to harbor a distaste for the season. I think for me, I focus so much on wishing there was more daylight and wishing that when I get out of work, it's not just completely black outside. I really don't like the cold either. And that has always been a concern for me. I like to joke that with wrists this skinny, I really I don't have great circulation. I'm kind of lanky and tall, and as a result, I don't have great blood circulation. And I that was for most of my life. I didn't have any issue with skin. I didn't really have many health issues at all. And now, I'm almost 30, and I'm at the point now where I don't have that youthful like guard against anything unpleasant corporeally. Like now I now I have to wear chapstick no matter if I go outside in the winter, even if it's 40 degrees, which is relatively warm for a winter's day here in this part of the country. Whether it's 40 or -1, it's chapstick, it's alpaca gloves, it's alpaca sweatshirts like this. Like I am just sitting there. like the heat miser, you know, like I wish it were 90 outside, you know. And it doesn't help that for the first time this year, I did a very typical New England thing where it was January and I went to Florida. And it was just so nice. It was just so nice. I wanted to stay there. I was like, oh man, I got to find some Florida water and I'll be all set. You know, it was amazing. And I wish I could have stayed there longer and not come back to this frigid hellscape. I love I love where I live, you know, and I'm thankful to have grown up here, but I'm a little tired of the cold and I can easily see myself when I have, you know, more dispensable income becoming a snowbird. Yeah, that easily.
Interesting.
And I want to like winter. Like I want to be like, oh, you know, every season has its perks. But, you know, when I'm sitting and we have like the heat turned to 70 degrees, which it should be more than enough if we're on the third floor. And it's still like, got that little bit of chill. I'm just done, you know. Just send me to Bermuda, you know. I I I feel like such a grumpy New Englander saying that. I really do. I'm kind of growing into a big stereotype, but you know, such is life. Okay,
Yeah.
so but to bring that in a little bit and to draw back closer to fragrance, I like John, I find myself leaning towards the ambers. I think we're gonna each kind of pick a couple of specific fragrances in this episode, and to kind of preview that without actually committing to any of these, because I've talked about a few houses several times on these talks, but there's a reason I do, and I don't want to choose these for one of my selections, but I do want to just mention I've had sort of a shift in my mindset about fragrances in the winter. When I first got into fragrances, it was still kind of cold outside. It wasn't the winter properly, but it was still relatively cool. When I first started, you know, getting deeper into the niche and indie and things that I didn't know existed before. And I really focused on Slumber House and Tom Ford, like the heavier Tom Fords and the heavier selections from imaginary authors, some of those ambery resinous perfumes. And I really thought that I was all about the dark, deep, complex fragrances. And, you know, I've had a bit of a shift now. I feel like both in my fragrance wearing and in my own tinkering and experimentations with creating my own fragrances, I'm going for things that are very relaxing and uplifting and lighter. And I'm still going to bring a few heavier, quote unquote, or spicier or more resinous perfumes to my selections today. But I do want to say, you know, kind of like that trip to Florida, I'm looking more and more in the winter for things that I can just wear indoors that don't necessarily have a ton of throw, aren't necessarily heavy, but make me feel relaxed and happy because I'm just tired of the weather. So that's sort of a transition I've made in recent times that I didn't necessarily have when I first started, you know, with a renewed interest in fragrance, but I have it now. And that probably says a lot more about me than you might even need to know, but such is it.
On that note, what's one of your choices, actually?
Okay, so I actually chose things that I do normally, you know, if we're taking the sum of all of my fragrance experience, these are things that I would normally find myself reaching for quite easily. And sort of banking on that idea of like relying a little bit on fantasy to kind of get you through times of the year that you don't really enjoy. I wanted to bring Fume, the fragrance from, I think, a criminally underrated all natural house from Spain called Brava Nariz, Brave Nose. Fume is this, how to describe it? I always say that it smells like the underside of a fantasy hearth, which is a very like, you know, it's a daft thing to say. I know this. It's a little silly, but I think it does. It is what I reach for when I'm kind of getting stir crazy, and I reach for it because I find myself reading a lot more in the winter, especially reading like fantasy and things of that nature. Just putting my mind in a place that I have never and probably can never go to. And it kind of distracts me and makes me feel a little bit more engaged. And likewise, I turn to this perfume for the same reason. You know, I like the fact that it smells like outdoors, but in a setting that you haven't been to. More specifically, it has these smokier, soft, smoky notes. And smoky notes can be scary, I think, because maybe people might associate it with like campfire and like that more camphoraceous, sharper smell that smoke can have. This doesn't have any of that. This is very soft and mellow, has shorter projection, but in a pleasant way. And it has some herbal notes and some orange notes at the very top. So if you like Terre de Hermes, but want something that smells much more outdoorsy, much more, going on a hike, you'd like Fume from Bravanari. It's got that twinkly outdoor open with, a lot of space to breathe. If you like Henley perfumes, actually, the American indie house of Henley, you'll probably like this as well. It's really beautiful.
It's I know that scent, and it's for me it's the combination of the orange and the smoke, which I really like. And I think with all Bravaneries, there's a little bit there is something a little bit potion like about them, a little bit kind of like they've been distilled from plants that have been kind of collected by moonlight. And I mean, actually, some of them haven't they? Or if not all of them, they're made from plants that are gathered in their natural environment and then tinctured or distilled, depending on what they are. Yeah, and I really like Fum too. I think it's really nice.
The perfumer Ernesto is one of the most magnanimous individuals I've ever had the pleasure to listen to. He's really just passionate about not only making his fragrances and about fragrance itself, but he like you said, he distills many of his own materials that he finds in the Spanish countryside, which is charming. But beyond the fact that it's charming, he does a great job with it. The materials themselves smell very. They smell what I think we all want. The natural materials to smell like. Natural materials are becoming sort of a marketing strategy in and of themselves, and he delivers on the goods. I mean, these are handcrafted materials, not all of them, but most of them, I think, in these compositions are things that he crafted, and they smell lovely as a result. I mean, they are very of their own place. I think, if I might say, like I grew up in America. I've lived in America all my life, and I feel like when I think of fantasy, and indeed many fantasy tropes, I think they kind of have like this European, old world European quality to them. Fantasy genre tropes usually do. And obviously, maybe there's a connection that's happening in my mind where the reason I think of fantasy genre when I smell this fragrance is because this is created out of things that grew in Europe, right? It grew in a part of Europe that specifically has a lot of history. His area of Spain, I was doing a little bit of reading once, kind of has a lot of older structures, I think. So, what is old structure to a European? I mean, you live in a part of the world where, everything is old, but it is very terroir. It's a wine lover's dream fragrance too, for that reason.
That's fascinating. I have a sample of it that I have not opened yet, which I'll absolutely do after this.
It's great in the winter. Again, there's something kind of spooky about it. It when I say it smells like the underside of a fantasy hearth, I can mean that a little bit more literally too. I can bring it back to reality and say that it smells like after you've had a fire and the embers have completely cooled down, and there's a little bit of earthiness there. There's a little bit of that ashy kind of quality. Yeah, it's a really interesting, and maybe even a little bit of something that's metallic, almost like smelling the still that he distilled the materials in. So it's really interesting fragrance. I recommend you give that sample a try during the winter, John.
We will, definitely will.
How about you, Nicola? Can we hear something a little bit more about your feelings on the season and maybe your first selection?
Yeah. So I live in the north of the UK, in Yorkshire. It's not kind of, if you take the whole spectrum of weather and coldness, it's not that cold here in the winter. It kind of hovers around 0. We do get frost. We get frost a lot, but very, very little snow actually. And like it gets damp here, really damp cold. So we get a lot of thick mist and thick fog. And yeah, everything dies back, and you get this kind of, there's a kind of a very specific steel grey sky that we get. So you get a lot of kind of skeletal trees that are just black scribbles against the sky. And it's quite moody and a bit Edgar Allan Poe-ish at times. And yeah, so kind of typical winter weather is drizzle, like rain that's being blown at you horizontally, or just kind of days where everything's grey from the ground to the sky to the everything in between. It's just quite grey, which makes it sound unpleasant, but it's not. There's something quite cozy about it, and there's something quite I hesitate to say magical, but I live in a very, very old city. The city of York is 2,000 years old, and to see the city walls like shrouded in mist, it's almost like the history's kind of seeping out, and you kind of imagine that you could see, a Roman centurion walking past round the corner of the bar, or a Viking coming from the other direction, or anything in between. So it's got this kind of moody atmosphericness, which I really like, actually. And yeah, I like winter generally. I like seasons that have got they've got something about them. They've got a personality about them. So I'm like less of a fan of spring. It seems a bit wishy-washy to me, just spring. But yeah, I do quite like winter. And so for my first selection, I'd really debated about whether to put this in. And I thought one of the things that is really important to me about these chats is authenticity, and it's truthfulness. And people, as we all know, people get very snobby about perfume, and you get people who are like, "Oh, I wouldn't wear that; it's too popular. I wouldn't wear that; it's got too much ISO super in it." And so I've picked something which I think it polarizes people. It's clearly a huge seller. And a lot of people wear it, but I think a lot of other people get quite snotty about it. So it's just this is not a full bottle. It's just a little travel spray that I've got. It's Replicas by the Fireplace by Maison Margiela. And I debated about putting it in because I thought, is it a good perfume? And it's a very successful perfume, but I don't know that it's a good perfume. But the way I like to think about fragrance sometimes is that it's a bit like food. Sometimes you want to eat a stir fry that's made of beautiful, fresh ingredients that have been gathered straight out of your garden or your allotment, and you want it to be really fresh and really healthful and really like super delicious. And sometimes you want a really dirty burger. And both are okay, both is fine. It's just about what you want at that time. And there's nothing wrong with having a dirty burger, and there's nothing wrong with having a lovely stir fry in and of themselves. It's just you probably don't want to do one all the time. And so I do feel a bit like that about fragrance. And I'm not saying that By the Fireplace is a dirty burger of a fragrance, but it does feel like...
I just want to hear you say dirty burger a few more times.
It does feel like it's not trying very hard. Like it's kind of gone, you know what? People like the smell of fireplaces. They like the smell of embers. They like the smell of wood. They like a bit of sweetness in there. And if you read, the notes list is cloves, pink pepper, orange blossom, chestnut, gaiac wood, juniper, vanilla, Peru balsam, and cashmeran. It's like a list of kind of things that people like, and it's things that I like actually as well. And I just wear it a lot in winter because it's comforting. It's sort of snuggly warm. It makes me think of having a roaring fire in the log burner. I don't know. There's just something really satisfying about it. I don't. When I first spray it, I just get a blast of kind of big aroma chemicals like ISO super, and it's all I can smell. But then when it dries down, it becomes much more subtle and much more nuanced, and actually, to my mind, a better scent towards that kind of latter third of a wear, think the first third is very rough at times. Um, but yeah, I just really like it, and I wear it, and I wanted to put it in because I think some people will be able to identify with the fact that it is looked down upon a little bit sometimes, but actually, you know what? If it gives you joy, you should wear it anyway. But then I kind of wanted to talk a little bit around things that are in that vein as well, that kind of sweet, smoky, like kind of they're almost like comfort food fragrances in a way, even though they're not necessarily gourmand. Although some of them are. But there's Secrets of Love Gourmet by Nicola, which has a similar kind of profile, but it goes to burnt rice pudding rather than kind of burnt wood. And that kind of that thick rice puddingy skin that you get. And it's absolutely beautiful. The problem for that one for me is the longevity. It doesn't last at all, but it's such a good fragrance otherwise. And then things like Lune Feline by Atelier des Ors, which is a bit woodier, a bit kind of more Swedish bakery than Fireside. And then actually, what I probably would have picked as my favourite, but I don't like to kind of send people toward this, towards discontinued stuff because they might fall in love with it and then it's not there anymore. Which is unfortunately a discontinued scent called Embers by Rouge Bonnet Rouge.
Oh,
such a good scent. So good.
It's one of my favorite, and it kind of breaks my heart that it's discontinued too.
Yeah.
I wonder, but you know what? I sort of knew when I first smelled Embers that it was going to be discontinued because it was almost so good that it couldn't last. You know what I mean? Isn't it? Isn't it just a? I was thinking about that fragrance before we met today. Yeah, well,
we're gonna have to track down a sample of this because now you've just piqued my curiosity beyond belief.
So good.
I'll give you some. I mean, I wear it. I actually don't wear it too often because it's such a it's almost a little too much of it. Triggers a lot of things for me. Some of them are complicated, actually, to be honest. Like, it's a very potent memory trigger for me. Not all good memories either. I'm not sure what quite that's about, but it's and I don't say that in any way to dissuade people, although it is discontinued. So I guess see, this is a highly complex trick for me to like corner the market on the remaining bottles, right? No, I'm kidding. But it's one of those it just evokes a ton of stuff because it is you know what, it reminds me actually of, like, things like Hans Christian Andersen's Little Match Girl, or stories that are actually rather difficult to read, and it has that kind of quality to it, like cold incense and the idea of smoke, and but in some ways that are almost a slightly bit industrial and maybe even a little dystopian in some ways, that even though it also has that warm comfort feeling, I also can even see a darker side to it, the fragrance as well too, which is fascinating to me, which is why that house has some interesting perfumes. But that one in particular was a real. I wanted to ask you the Atelier des Ors. What was the fragrance you mentioned? That name?
Lune Feline.
Lune Feline. Okay.
Yeah. It's a kind of like Swedish bakery type, woody, warm kind of, but they, kind of vanilla. They all kind of occupy a similar sector in my personal brain fragrance kind of groupings. Is they're all kind of in a similar room.
Right.
But yeah, some really nice ones there, and ones that I wish I'd got a backup bottle of Embers. It's one that I kind of haunt the groups hoping will eventually come up, but
I will Adam, I'll definitely give you a sample of it because it's a remarkable fragrance, and even I remember Luca Turin loved that perfume, and he's written about that it's closer to the smell of a lit match than anything he smelled before. Which is pretty interesting. Do you know, I wanted to mention though, when you talked about the replica scent by the fireplace, which I think I have a bottle, and I have about 7 or 8 of the replica fragrances. And one thing I do like about what they do, because sometimes they really nail a couple concepts well, like I'm forgetting the name of it now, and I have it, but it's the that very aldehydic soapy thing that came up, the bubble bath one, which was just, I love that fragrance. And they just sort of take a concept, and they occasionally they'll just say, we're just going to illustrate this idea, and they just, everything else is put aside. So it's a very, very narrow vision, but very specifically so. In some cases it is this, like a photograph of a past place, but like Lipstick On is another, like I think it's a great fragrance. I mean, and I think it's as good as Chanel's Misia, in terms of that whole fatty lipstick, orangey, rosy kind of fragrance quality, so I like that concept. I think as a concept, I love this idea of just portraying almost like a, what would you call it? It's like capturing a scent memory in a little box, and you just take the lid off, and you're just, so I don't think they're terribly complex smells, but I think that they're really good at just sort of doing a little scratch and sniff of a memory sort of project, and I like that. And sometimes they just really work well. And I do think By the Fireplace is a good one.
Yeah. It's definitely, I think it's definitely one of my favorites from them, if not probably my favorite actually.
Yeah. No,
Such an unpretentious concept for a brand. It's very, it's unpretentious while also being very specific and cool. Yeah, I do love the concept of the brand. I can't say I've smelled too many of them, but what I have smelled, I thought were very acceptable. I mean, strong additions to the line. So no judgment from us.
They're a really good fragrance brand for people who are like trying to get into niche and don't want to be frightened off by something, massive and terrifying and really strange and unusual. Because they present these things which are kind of familiar and that are relatable, but they are that kind of step away from things that people might be, kind of associate with perfume, like the kind of high street brands. They are that sort of step into something a little bit less familiar, but keeping that familiar reference, so you're not, totally challenging yourself from the outset.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's a good way to put it, actually. Yeah.
So, John, do we have a selection from you for winter?
We do, actually. So this is a tough one to get deeper into this, because there's a lot of good ones, I'll tell you. But I went with something that I think also I was kind of thinking a little bit about things that people could get too. Like I wanted to get some things that would be okay for people to be able to find and whatnot. And this is one that I really do like a lot. And so this is a Lush fragrance, and this is cardamom coffee, which is not discontinued, because I know they will occasionally discontinue things which frustrate people. And it's also part of their permanent line, and is, I still believe, kind of one of the more reasonably priced of the Lush fragrances. What I like about it, and it's interesting in a way, because I would almost, this is of a smell and mouthfeel and environment and everything akin to what you were just speaking of, I think, Nicola, cardamom coffee. It's such a good one. I mean, and it is really specific, right? It really is, kind of like a bit of a amplifying that fantasy idea of, what would a coffee cardamom fragrance smell like, but making it a little more perfumey. It's not just a photorealist picture of, a kind of Middle Eastern coffee drink. It's just a tiny bit more perfumey. And I wanted to checked on the notes here, because I knew there was an unusual note in here, and that's there's an olive wood and sort of olive tree note in here. So it's a bit of, you do get that smell of that slightly, I never know the word to describe the smell and taste of olives, but we all know what that is, right? That thing, that kind of green, oily thing, which is lovely, but there's that hint of that kind of oil in here, which for some reason just works really well at giving you the sense of a very freshly made cup of extremely strong coffee, which still has like a bit of an oil slick on the top. I have to say, though, what I do enjoy so much about this is that it doesn't overwhelmingly reek of coffee the way that there's a couple of coffee fragrances out there that are meant to just be depictions of coffee. This isn't it. It uses coffee as a building block toward a fragrance. So when you smell it, you can pull out a bit of coffee in here. And the cardamom is noticeable to a degree, although I like it how it's kind of blended in. But it really is more of one piece of a whole, and there's also like a bit of oud, definitely some rose in here, which I know the rose becomes much more apparent when it starts to dry down a bit. The coffee is much more, almost operates as a top note in this, but it's extremely pleasant. And it also has that nice feature of it really, when I've worn this, people around me notice and say, gosh, you smell good, kind of a thing, which I don't get a lot of that stuff. I mean, but this is one of those handful of fragrances that people actually do respond really positively to. Yeah, this is a fantastic winter scent. I don't think I've ever worn it outside of winter, really. It's just, it begs to be worn in the cold. I'm not quite sure why, but yeah.
Yay, the cat's appeared.
It would not be a Fragrantica Talks episode without an appearance from Finnegan, our little mascot here.
Hey, buddy.
Causing havoc in my workspace, but whatever.
I was just going to say, he's taking a little, is he going to work now? Is that what
I think he's going to work, yeah.
What about you, Adam? Do you have something for us next?
Yeah, absolutely. Tea is another comfort of mine in the winter. I work from home a lot, and I find myself in the habit of right around tea time, after early afternoon, kind of taking a little break from work. Oh, he is causing havoc, isn't he? Okay, well, of making some tea in the afternoon and sort of enjoying the comforting warmness of it. And I'm certainly not unique in that venture. I mean, it's the world's most popular beverage. But something I do think is unique in the fragrance world is it's this perfume. It's sort of an interesting one to describe because it's not like it's a part of like a standard line. It was actually made for the magazine Nez or Ne, and it's called Hong Kong Oolong, and it was sort of made. It was made by Maurice Roussel, the perfumer, for the magazine, and it sort of complements the issue, but it also stands on its own as just a really incredible fragrance, and it's a great tea fragrance. Something I think that the world needs more of. It's got that kind of funky saline element that oolong has. I mean, I think you'd be forgiven for maybe associating on a bad day, let's say, some elements of like something you'd rub on a wound. I'm so sorry. I know that that's going to turn people off from the fragrance, but don't be. I say that in sort of an extreme figure of speech. It has that salty, umami, saline quality that oolong tea, fresh loose leaf oolong tea, does have. Along with a whole host of spices, it's a comforting scent more than anything else. But it does have that kind of sharp opening that you would expect from putting your head in a big bag of oolong tea. Theaspirane is a material that I think is often used to communicate tea leaves. And when I think of it, I think it's a great word because I want to say that this smells theaspiric. It makes its own language. This scent does. It's
I'm sorry to interrupt.
That texture or that sharper, almost metallic, but not quite quality that tobacco sometimes has in fragrance. This has something similar in the base of it, sort of laid out tenderly against a bed of musks and vanilla and other spices. But it's really something that if you like the idea of a tea fragrance, black tea specifically, and if you like the idea of spices without being a spice scent, then you got to check out Hong Kong Oolong from, I guess we'll call it the House of Ne or the House of Nez. It's for the magazine. And by the way, beautiful magazine, amazing magazine.
That sounds amazing. I love tea and fragrance, and you've both kind of mentioned that like warm beverages, coffee and tea, and I wonder, have either of you tried "Remember Me" by Javoy? Because that's got like
Yeah.
that kind of warm, milky coffee, which is
Yeah.
gorgeous. It's so comforting.
Yeah.
Or Chai by Baruti for a tea fragrance, which is stunning. It's so big and so spicy and so tea and absolutely gorgeous. Or of course there's Thé Noir by Le Labo as well.
Yeah, fortunately I've smelled all three of those, which is nice. Like, which is great, actually. Which is it's a rare case that someone can rattle off a few, and I'm like, yep, yep, yep. But yeah, those are all real stunners. Actually, they really are. One thing I think is interesting about what you described, Adam, is how there is a certain smell. And I remember at one point I didn't live very far from Chinatown in New York when I was in college. And I remember the huge barrels of tea, because you could buy sort of the pre-boxed tea, and then they just will shovel out tea in scoops, and you can buy them, by the ounces or pound or whatever. And I remember some of those large barrels of tea, or in some cases canisters for the rarer teas, and there's a certain quality, especially with the oolongs or like the semi-fermented type teas, that are they're almost slightly unpleasant, right? When they're not brewed, and they're just sort of, like stored and whatever. Like, I don't even want to say, maybe unpleasant is the word. They're just a lot more complicated in their smell, aren't they? Or they're closer to what their actual botanical origins are, or something, maybe, is what I'm saying. Like, they're not, I feel like when we finally get it and there's milk added and it's sugared up and it's in a nice porcelain cup, like it's a couple steps removed from that actual original source, which is a little rougher, or more uh like, yeah, I'm not quite sure, I'm losing some of my words here, but there's something very different.
Dare I say twiggy about something kind of snappy?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Botanical, you said it, and that's a great way to describe it too.
But you're right though, twiggy, or yeah, like, or just something like, I'm sure that when these things are picked and gathered and all of those stages, there's got to be a series of very different smells along the way when all of that processing is happening, and then when it's fermented a bit and then packed and shipped, and like all of that, it's got to be a fascinating array of smells that are happening, that come from those leaves in that time, right?
Well, as
Um,
a side note, at the time that we're recording this, I'm currently working slowly on a roundup of sort of different types of tea and its use and scent, or accords and scent. And I have to say, something that I discovered while I was researching for that article is that tea as a note, kind of to your point there, John, is that it's a very difficult one to portray. I feel like, you know,
yeah,
jasmine or rose can be portrayed in so many different ways and still come off
yeah,
convincingly themselves. And I don't know that the same is true for something like a tea accord, because it's
yeah,
a very complicated smell that has to have certain elements, and if they aren't portrayed clearly, I think they kind of get muddied up and pushed to the background. I think, unfortunately, similar to coffee in that respect, in fragrance, coffee is sort of difficult because the
yeah,
materials that are natural, that are extracts of coffee, don't tend to last the longest, and they also are kind of these, for lack of a better term, they behave in a puffy kind of cloudy way where they can literally cloud a blend if you put too much, but then if you put too little, they can't compete with things that are stronger than them. So
hmm
it's it, tea and coffee are very strange and difficult accords to really nail in perfume,
yeah,
um,
great.
in my opinion. But also, I do want to just say briefly, having smelled the two things I just sprayed, uh, this Fume from Bravanaris and Hong Kong Oolong from the Nez house, uh, when
Yes.
when put together, amazing. Oh man, I didn't expect it. Oh man, I'm not much of a layerer, but these two, I'm gonna be doing that when we get off the call. That's brilliant. On strip anyway. Let's see if it works out on skin, but worked surprisingly well.
That's excellent.
So I think we're going round now. Back to you, Nicola.
Yeah.
So, I, when I was putting this list together of the ones that I really wanted to focus on, it became apparent to me that even when I tried to pick ones that didn't have vanilla in, I was picking ones that had vanilla in. So I'm going to take you to a spicy vanilla next with D600 by Carna Barcelona, which is, well, yeah, it's exactly that. It's a really spicy vanilla. It's not a kind of sweet, unctuous, sticky vanilla. I mean, the notes are pepper, grapefruit, bergamot, iris, cardamom, jasmine, vanilla, vetiver, and Virginia cedar. But in as far as notes lists go, I find that one doesn't really convey that. You can read them sometimes and you think, yeah, that's exactly what it smells like. I read that and I think it sounds very jumbled when you sort of read it like that, but actually, you've got some sort of spices and some sourness, and then you've got some warmth and some floral aspects, and then vanilla. But all that aside, kind of forget it. The two main players are vetiver and vanilla, and so you get that kind of dry, aromatic cloud. It's a big perfume. I find that if I wear it in summer, it's too much, but I like it in winter very much because it just kind of takes that fuzzy, buzzy kind of infiltration of the vetiver and just calmed it down a little bit. So you get slightly more of the vanilla in the winter. And incidentally, like with vanilla, I thought for the longest time that I hated vanilla. I thought it was awful. It was really sweet and sickly, and it smelled like children's bubble bath, and just not for me. And then I smelled good vanilla, and it totally opened up a new kind of sector of perfumery that I'd been avoiding because I'd look at notes and think, oh, it's vanilla. Oh, I don't like that. And now I can't get enough of really good vanilla. Like a bit of an kind of I've become a bit of a vanilla collector, it seems almost. But yeah, for me this it's kind of a weird one. It's like I think the ones that people tend to go for from Carna are El Born and Palo Santo. They're the big sellers, I think, and I really like El Born very much. And weirdly, I was in El Born a couple of years ago, and it does smell like every street corner does smell of pastries.
That's funny.
But D600, I don't know. There's something a little bit special about it. I feel like it's almost obnoxious, but it just manages to be charming rather than awful. You kind of think, oh, it's actually really nice rather than it being too irritating. Now, doubtless some people are going to find it an irritating perfume because it does have that highly aromatic quality that tends to kind of get you right in the middle of the head. But yeah, I just really like it, and particularly in winter, it is a bit warm. It is a bit like putting another coat on, and it's just really nice.
I'm curious about, you mentioned the sort of predominance of vetiver and vanilla, and that just kind of struck me as an interesting grouping of smells, together. That's not very typical, is it? It's a kind of a
it's not one that I've smelt a lot, and I think maybe that's why I gravitate towards it, because I do like vetiver and I do like vanilla, but yeah, it doesn't feel like very often that you smell them together, and you've got that kind of tension between them, because I'm not as technical, with them. I'm not as I have smelt quite a lot of raw materials, but I don't tend to mix my own stuff. I don't tend to put them together. But to me, with the vetiver, you've got a kind of very buzzy, very what I think of as being a kind of high energy type of ingredient that just wants to race off in all directions, and it's quite sort of spicy sometimes, and almost like a cloud of pepper dust, that sort of feel. Whereas with the vanilla, you've got something that's much slower, much more languid, much more kind of sticky and oozy. And the two facets, I think, are almost in opposition, but then they add this lovely tension to the fragrance where you're like, oh, what is that? Is it buzzy and exciting, or is it slow and more relaxing? What's going on? And I just think it works really well. I like scents that have got a bit of drama in them, and this feels like it does because it's got that push-pull of the two different facets, kind of almost trying to tear each other apart, but not quite managing it because the perfume has tied them together so nicely.
Mm,
So
that's so
yeah,
interesting.
yeah, it's a good one. That I think it's quite a cool one. I quite like
Do you
it.
know what the name, where that name comes from? Because I remember I had a sample years ago, and I'd love to go. I probably still have it. I'd love to go smell it again because I got a bunch of the kind of samples. There's one that he makes no, that's Monagal. That's another house altogether. Okay, I'm getting mixed up. But do you know what the name comes from, by the way? Or
I think it's the like the zip code for. Oh, Winnie's joining in now. I think it's the zip code or the sort of postcode for that the area of Barcelona where they're based.
okay, that's cool. Nice one.
So yeah.
Yeah, cool.
So who's next? Are we back to John or Adam?
I could jump in,
Please,
unless
yeah.
you really got a strong desire to go next to Adam.
I think we just need. I think we just need like a quick shot of Finnegan and his like disruptive face, and just the music in the background goes da da da. You know, well, his name F Fragrantica F. Oh,
Right.
seriously.
That would be pretty funny, actually. So I decided, I had a couple of what I thought were typical, like, oh yeah, that's a shoe-in for a third, option. But I've made a kind of executive choice that no, I kind of want to go with a newer, something I've more recently been embracing as a winter scent, just change it up a bit. So this is a fairly new release. This came out last year, and this is a diptyque perfume. This is Orpheon. And what I like powdery fragrances. I know some folks, there's very mixed feelings about all this, right? Some people like them, some don't.
Mixed indeed.
Yes, I know. Get off this camera. This I particularly liked a lot because it's powdery, it's soft, but it's got just a little bit of cedar in here and a little bit of jasmine, but a pretty strong juniper as well. So if you can imagine juniper, and I think what to my nose is more like the juniper berries and cedar, right? Which just sounds like this kind of pretty outdoorsy fragrance. And then this powdery stuff in here, right? This like very almost like makeup-y sort of powdery stuff. So it's a complete contradiction in terms, but it overall, to my nose, is extremely warm, soft, and unbelievably wearable scent. Really comforting scent. God, it's such a nice fragrance. Very soft, very, this isn't a sillage bomb. It's not a something that you wear to make huge statements or anything like that. This is definitely just something you put on in the morning, and it would just have a very soft little kind of halo around you during the day. But it's incredibly pleasant, very mildly sweet. I almost want to say it has like that the kind of smell and feel that you get from like rice powder or something like a smell of basmati rice or something like that. It's like that kind of a delicacy of smell from the powdery notes. And I've just really grown to love it very quickly. It didn't make huge waves when it came out. I don't think it was supposed to make huge waves. It would be hard for a fragrance like this to really, knock over the masses, because it doesn't. It literally doesn't. It would do it with a whisper if it did, right? So, but I think that it's terrific, and I think it also is sort of a of any house that does subtle, certainly Diptyque has done some very, they've certainly made a few perfumes that have a big footprint. This one has a soft footprint, but I think they do soft footprint fragrances very well, if that makes sense. Like some of their softer perfumes are gorgeous.
Yeah, like Philosikos is gorgeous as well, isn't it? And although quite different in tone, and Tam Dao as well. I think that's one of the other. I imagine they're the kind of the bigger sellers, but they do what exactly like you said. They do what they do very very well, and they're almost like there's one that I had a violent kind of dislike to, but all the others, I think this is a very good kind of workhorse fragrance that you can wear, and it's a
Mhm.
safe. It's almost like and I'm not sure anything's a safe blind buy, but you're almost as safe as you're ever going to be with a diptyque fragrance, I think.
No,
Uh,
that's a good way to put it. Like it's very rare that I've smelled a diptyque where I was like, oh, oh, that's awful. I can't wear that, or something, or
mm,
it's so polarizing or strange. Like I think they really, it's interesting. I think, and this may be based on the fact that I believe they, at least in their first, I mean, it was a group of sort of artists and designers that got together in the 60s, right? That started the house. And I think that they really wanted to make somewhat utilitarian things, if I'm not mistaken. Like they wanted to make usable products. I mean, obviously they wanted to do cool art and design alongside it, but they really were interested in making things that people would use and that were functional. And I think that feeling is still very much inherent in the brand. It's not out to, I don't know, it's not out to sort of like revolutionize perfume, but within that they've developed a lot of creativity, though, I think, because if there's a wide range of different smells within their fragrances, which is very interesting to me.
mm,
But I've really liked embracing something that's not what I have traditionally worn in winter, which has been, the heavy ambers and spice type perfumes. This is a little bit more like something I typically wear in like late spring or something. But yeah, so this has been really enjoyable as winter for me. And Adam, I think you're going to wrap us up here, aren't you?
Yeah. So I chose another one that was more of a kind of a comfort in a way, a little less literally, because my first choice was about escapism, and my second choice was about something that's a little bit more of a literal comfort. My third choice is, kind of still harking back on my desire to be outside instead of inside during the winter. It's called Woodcut from Olympic Orchids,
Mm,
and it is kind of like a slightly caramelic wood shavings perfume. John, you were talking earlier when you first were talking about winter about desiring smells that really jump out at you and have some throw to them in the
yeah.
winter. And I mean, this definitely has it in spades. It is kind of akin to standing on at the backside of like a saw when it's like throwing the freshly, yeah, all those little particles of hewn wood at you.
Right.
The opening is anyway. And
Yeah.
like I said, it kind of develops into something a little bit more of like a burnt sugar in the way, way dry down, like way in the base of it. And the combination is simple but delightful. It's really a distinctly kind of Yankee New Englander imagery for me. It kind of holds
Mhm.
that within it, insofar as like you could picture yourself at a mill that isn't working anymore, you know?
Mm,
Uh,
mhm.
it, the name is quite direct too. You got to respect that. You know what you're getting into when you read a fragrance that's named Woodcut. It is precisely that. Um, with some of, I like that the perfumer Ellen Covey decided to make like a caramelic accord for the very heart of it, because um, it kind of mirrors that sappy, sweet, almost might associate it with maple, or you might associate it with another kind of sugary, sweet, resinous smell that trees freshly cut down and formed might still have. Um, I worked in a lumber yard one summer, and I
Mm,
know we're talking about winter fragrances, but bear with me. Uh, it was in this kind of a pit that was filled with like tar on the ground. It's like you'd drive down into it with your truck and pick up the lumber that you needed and leave. But the
mm,
result of its sort of situation was that in the summer, I mean, it would cook, it would absolutely bake. And it, maybe I'm going crazy, but I just have a distinct memory of the smell of all like the freshly hewn lumber sort of heating up and staying warm even once we were about to pack up and the worst of the day's heat was gone. It would just the area surrounding it would just emanate with that kind of sweet, sappy wood quality that there's like a hint of that in this. Honestly, sometimes these heavy cedar, heavy wood shaving kind of smells kind of make my throat back up a little bit. They kind of it kind of gets it doesn't just affect your nasal passage; it kind of gets your throat a little bit too. I'm not having any kind of reaction to it. It's just sort of the texture of it. Hey, texture. We're right back where we started last week. So even if I hate winter temperatures, I do look to this to remind me of what I like about New England and sort of its broken down old mills. And there is sort of an element of it that reminds me of my dad. He was in construction. So it's a smell that's very familiar to me as well. So it's sort of a comforting blend of aromas in its own respect for me. And I highly recommend it if you like cedar smells, if you like intensely woody fragrances, you'd probably like Woodcut from Olympic Orchids.
It sounds beautiful. I'd really like to
It is
smell
stunning.
that.
I will send you some samples. I think I have some in excess. So definitely I'll send you some.
It has a bit of a cult following, that fragrance, doesn't it too? And then
So,
a few of her fragrances as well, like that. And I know is it Blackbird? Or
Blackbird. Yeah.
yeah, I have Blackbird. And there's the pair she made, Dev 1 and Dev 2. Was that the names of them? Yeah, which I have one of those as well, which is beautiful. Yeah, some of those earlier ones that she made were just, yeah, they were, I mean, she's still making great work, of course, but yeah,
I mean,
that's a beautiful one. Yeah.
Woodcut either won or was up for an award of some kind. I forget which one specifically. I'm not sure if it was Institute for Art and Olfaction or a different one.
I think it was Institute Art and Olfaction, yeah.
And then the same perfumer, Ellen Covey, she did the original formulation for Bat, which, love it or hate it, it's got quite a following. In fact, there are people who still seek out the original formula, which she is selling in her own line now, privately outside of Zoologist. And it has fans. It has people who track it down. So
it was so unique, though, wasn't it? I mean,
yeah,
just so unique and so quite utterly bewitching. In terms of sense telling stories, Bat, which I think is the only one I've smelt of Ellen Covey's compositions, but it just, you were immersed in that world straight away, totally just consumed by it, which I thought was a really clever fragrance. And I was helping a friend pick out a fragrance for her wedding, and almost as a bit of a kind of test, I threw in Bat, and her fiance was like, "Oh my god, you've got to wear that." She was like, "No, I'm not wearing that. Not for my wedding." But he loved it. He absolutely loved it. He thought it was amazing. So
imagine if that bride to be was strolling down the aisle and notes of rotten banana skin and soy.
Banana skins and damp caves and notes of damp caves, and yeah, that's great.
But to go back to John's point about wearing stuff that you're not necessarily, it isn't normally perhaps your your métier for this season. My final choice is one that I feel not bad about how much in love with it I am, but surprised. Surprised, I think. Just surprised by how much it's got its hooks into me. And it's Ludo by Sarah Baker. Now, I did, probably isn't a surprise that I'm including this because I named it as one of my best fragrances of last year. But I want to preface talking about it by saying that I don't like oud. I don't think of myself as being an oud person. I find it a little bit... it's just not me, really. A little bit heavy, a little bit full on sometimes. I feel like I'm quite sensitive to fragrances, so I tend to underspray. And I find oud, even if you put a tiny little bit on it, it's quite powerful. And I realise that's probably just I haven't smelled the right ouds, or I haven't smelled the ouds for me yet. But so when I kind of got a sample of this to review, I thought, I'm not going to like that. And I sprayed it on and I thought, yeah. And the more I wear it, the more obsessed by it I get, and the more utterly in love with it I am. So it's bergamot neroli, petitgrain, black cherry, cypriol, orange blossom, white chocolate, oud, musk, amber, and vanilla. So there's vanilla recurring again, I'm afraid. But it's this play between an oud note, which is, it's kind of oudy. It doesn't really, it sort of fleetingly goes barnyardy, but only fleetingly. But it's the food, the kind of gourmand elements make it so playful, and I do think I love that it's a pun, as its name. It's a pun on Ludo, with oud in there, obviously. And if you can pull a good pun off, I'm a fan, definitely. But yeah, it's just the kind of that extreme woodiness with chocolate and cherries. And some days I put it on and I don't get so much the chocolate, but I do get the cherry. And some days I put it on and I get more of the other thing. But I just think it's really good. And the more I wear it, the more I'm sort of craving it and wanting to wear it. And I actually put some on to go to bed the other night, and then if you go to bed wearing a really strong fragrance, I woke up in the middle of the night and I was, what's that lovely smell? Oh, it's me. So it's a fantastic scent, and it's blown my socks off, and I think more so because I really didn't expect it to. I thought I would not like it. And I sort of, perhaps a little bit perversely, I love being proved wrong by a scent. I love thinking, oh, that's going to smell a certain way, and then it doesn't, or I'm not going to like that, and then I love it. And I love that challenge. I love that kind of, it's different to how you imagine, and it shocks you and it wakes you up and you think, oh, hang on a minute. And, smelling a lot of scents, there's a good proportion that become nice, but a bit same old, and Ludo's not like that at all. It really, it made me sit up and pay attention for sure. So it's a great fragrance, and I would urge everybody to check it out because it's fab.
I'm curious about that whole inclusion of the chocolate on there, because there's a similar, at least in my mind, like there's a similar, almost like, again, texture. Going back, repeating ourselves here, but that's okay. There's that, to my mind at least, a sort of a slightly fuzzy or velvety texture to cacao, chocolate, those type of things that can be very similar to oud. And so when you were talking about it, and I thought, actually there's sort of almost a natural pairing to those notes or those accords or something that I hadn't even really thought about before, but that really makes a lot of sense. I wouldn't have imagined or necessarily pulled that together in my head on my own, but it makes a heck of a lot of sense now.
I think that's exactly it. Like, it's almost like it was so not obvious, but it is there, and as soon as somebody puts them together, you go, yeah, that really works. And I thought that's just going to be weird. But there's something about the sweetness of both as well. There is that velvety texture, and then there's that kind of sweetness too, that ties it together really quite neatly. And you think, oh yeah, I see what you're doing there, and it's really good.
Very interesting.
Very. I think, kudos to Chris Maurice for doing that. I think that's very clever perfumery. So
yeah, absolutely. Also, it sounds like it's a very full, like that's a pretty wide range of material in there too, like from some very sweet uplifting top notes to some very heavy bass notes there.
Yeah. And it's a big scent as well. So you get, you were talking right back at the beginning about wearing, a scent that you get to smell when you're wearing a coat. I wore this the other day, and I had a mask on all day, but I still was catching whiffs of it, and I really like that. And I thought, maybe I've put a little bit much on that I might be knocking people out, if they didn't all have masks on too. But I think I'll get away with it. So yeah, it's super perfume.
That's excellent.
Well, I feel slightly less chilly now that we've spoken about all these beautiful things. My heart is warmed.
Yeah.
My cold, thin extremities aren't, but I'll take the emotional warmth over anything else.
Yeah.
Have we got any more that we want to just shout out as winter favourites? Because I've got a couple, if you'll indulge me.
Please, yeah.
Just ones that I wanted to kind of bring in, but I didn't quite get time to, or didn't, there wasn't an immediate link to. Yeah. But Rosarium, Angela Champagne, cold stony incense with a vanilla like ribbon of sweetness. So it's such a beautiful fragrance. Angela Champagne, vastly underrated brand. They're so good, so magical. That's a stunner.
Mhm.
And then the Chronic by Byron Parfums. There was a massive hype train around that,
Yeah. Yes.
and
Yeah.
I kind of was a bit late to the hype train, but I got myself a little bottle of it.
Mhm.
And I just love how bonkers it is. It just feels like it's totally bonkers. It's sort of smooth and it's energetic and it's a bit sandalwoody and it's a bit, kind of, big aroma chemically.
Mhm.
And I just really like it in the cold. Actually, in the cold, it kind of comes alive to me, and you get that sort of shiny facet a little bit more, which I thought was great.
Mhm.
And then Zadig and Voltaire, This Is Her. Another sandalwood, which in summer I find, I don't know, summer just seems to kill it for me. But winter, it's powdery, it's woody, it's sweet, it's a little bit milky. It's just really nice in winter.
Mm.
So yeah, and it's an interesting fragrance. It feels like, it is kind of designer, high street, but it's an interesting one, and check it out because it's unusual.
Absolutely. I've liked the Zadig and Voltaire fragrances so far that I've smelled. I think they're good.
Yeah,
I like them generally. Yeah.
I see the male version of that getting quite good reviews, but I think this is worth. It's called This Is Her, but it's incredibly unisex. Like, there's nothing about it that makes me think that's a woman's fragrance specifically. It's a sweet woody fragrance, so I think anybody could wear it.
Yeah.
Um,
There was one more I was just going to throw in, which I happen to be smelling, which I think is kind of a fun addition, and I like to occasionally like fill in gaps where I think, oh, I probably should be smelling this one. And one was I picked up this it's the new version of Moustache by Rokas, which was an old uh, storied and some people are very disdainful of this, like, oh, it's completely reinvented and it doesn't smell anything like the original. And it's true, it's good they threw out the whole old formula and redid it. But it's just this fantastic upbeat warm rosy amber thing, and it's nothing groundbreaking by any stretch of the imagination, but it's really nice and it does what it does very well, and it's not expensive, and I'm always something that does that genre well, and with a good price tag, and also that doesn't kind of end with this sort of synthetic fade off that smells like, ugh, it didn't quite have a nice ending. This really is a very smooth ending. That's something that I've been reaching for as well too. So the new version of Mustache by Rokas is a nice kind of winter buy, I think. Yeah.
any last thoughts from you, Adam, to wrap us up?
Yeah, another couple of things that I reach for often. I like I insinuated at the start of the recording. I don't really want to bring them as selections just because I talk about them very often anyway. But Slumber House Norn, for similar
Mhm.
reasons as the Bravanari's pick, sort of a fantasy forest kind of thing. Animal Mondain from Pierre Guillaume. I mean, we have a whole episode on Pierre that you can check out at your leisure. But it bears repeating. I mean, I reach for it in the fall often too, but does something nice in the winter. And then Diaz and Durga's Ombre Quiso, and that's something that I really can only wear when it's very cold. I find it has tremendous throw and
Yeah.
a lot of power
Yeah.
behind it, and
Yeah.
kind of like what you were saying earlier about your extra pick there, Nicola. It kind of gets ruined in anything remotely resembling a warm temperature.
Mm,
Becomes very overwhelming, but in the cold, it's quite a companion. So
mm,
those are my extra
Yeah.
buy-ins there.
yeah,
Right. Nice.
fabulous.
Yeah.
Well, of course, we want to hear about the thoughts of anybody watching and reading on Fragrantica or in the comments. We'd love to hear um, what everybody else is wearing this winter, and maybe more importantly, what emotional connections that you forge with it. The winter can be a sad, sullen time for some. And it can be a joyous time as well, even for me. So, love to hear what kind of connections our audience is forming with their own winter selections.